Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday Mornings at Maine. My name is Heather Miller, and I'm an adult programming librarian here at the La Crosse Public Library. Thanks, friends. So glad to have you here today. I think we're all super excited to talk about cranberries in Wisconsin. Yes? Seeing a lot of enthusiasm. Awesome. Well, I have my friend Lindsey Rushford here from the UW extension of Madison, and she's going to tell us all about how Wisconsin became the best in cranberry growing. So please give her a warm welcome.
I'm Lindsey. I actually live and work here in La Crosse, but I have a statewide position with Extension. So I'm all over the state usually, and the La Crosse office was gracious enough to give me a desk there, even though they're not obligated to. So, first of all, I love our library. This is amazing. I had no idea that there were groups gathering this large on Monday mornings to hear about all kinds of topics, and it sounds like to do some fitness routines and things like that. So kudos to all of you for coming out and joining the library and stuff like this. I think we have a really a gem here in La Crosse that a lot of communities don't have. So again, I'm Lindsey Rushford. I work with UW Extension on a grant program for farmers. And so I'm actually not the expert in cranberries. Our expert, Allison John Jack, who's our cranberry outreach specialist, is harvesting on her family's cranberry marsh right now. So I'm filling in. So they started harvesting last Tuesday, and so she's been busy with that. So I've been working with her for about a month, kind of here and there when we have time to put together a presentation from pictures and stories that she has and from experiences I've had with her. So I'm hoping to do it justice. But in any case, if y'all have questions at the end about cranberries that I can't answer, I have a direct line to our outreach specialist in Wisconsin, so we can get the answers to you. So we're going to hope this works. It was working a second ago. Yay! Okay, so this is Allison. I want to introduce her because all of this information is coming from her. So she's a cranberry outreach specialist with UW-Madison Division of Extension. And her family's cranberry marsh is way up in Sawyer County in northern Wisconsin. I have it circled on the map there if you can see it. And she's a third generation cranberry grower. She didn't always work in cranberries. She actually spent a lot of her adult career working in corn and then returned back to cranberries because she said it's the best crop. She wanted to come back to the best crop. And so her grandfather actually purchased land alongside two other Polish immigrants in northern Wisconsin. They all purchased land on the same day, and then John Jack Cranberry Marsh was born 85 years ago. So I asked her for some pictures. This is Allison harvesting last season. She said that this is a good explanation of why you need to wear the waders when you go into the flooded cranberry marsh. Hers sprung a leak. And so from the chest down, she is totally drenched. She did have waders on before. And then she sent me this picture. She's actually riding with the berries back to, let me check my notes because I'm not the expert and I got to use the expert's words. She's traveling with the berries up to the sorting station. So they're still trying to gather all the rest of the berries in the marsh behind her. But this is just the beginning of the process for her. So that's Allison. My words are her words. And so I'm going to try to do the best I can. So I'm going to talk about cranberries in Wisconsin. We grow the most cranberries in the world, right here in Wisconsin. And we grow 60% of the United States cranberries. So we're going to talk about the different factors that go into us becoming the best. So it all began 31,000 years ago, if you can believe it. Cranberries are native to Wisconsin. They weren't a crop that were brought here by Europeans or others around the world. They were growing here by evolution and something to do with sphagnum moss. I don't know the details of this. It was really hard to learn it in a short period of time. But the glaciers played a big role in this. And so pressure and temperature and the existence of microbes that are already here in Wisconsin, kind of through evolution, cranberries developed here in this area. So Europeans were not the first ones here. Folks were using cranberries for culinary purposes and medicinal purposes long before my family ever got here. So native peoples were using cranberries, found them growing naturally on the landscape. And so the Ojibwe word for cranberry is Mushkegamin, and that translates to swamp and little berry. And so this was kind of an interesting thing that, the naming comes from literally what we're seeing. And we'll talk about why the swamp part comes into that. So once Europeans came to the area, they started surveying the land and looking for the optimal soil to grow crops. Because when you move to a new area and there aren't grocery stores, you got to grow your own food. So they found a lot of different soils in Wisconsin. This is something that's really unique to our area, especially with our history of glaciers. They were finding sandy soils, which we often find in the central part of Wisconsin. A lot of potatoes are growing there for that reason. A lot of clay, thick, heavy clay soils are a lot more prevalent in the eastern part of Wisconsin. But they're also finding swamp soil. And so they determined maybe that's not where we want to live. There were other really great soils in Wisconsin that were really great for growing crops. And they're like, we're going to leave those spots behind. And what they ended up calling those spots were unfit for cultivation. And what else did they call them? Swampy and marshy. And so these were things that they were talking about, these parts of Wisconsin, that they're like, all right, if we have a choice to go somewhere else, we're going to go somewhere else and find good soil so that we can grow corn and potatoes and beans and everything that we might need. Little did they know that the Native Americans knew something that they didn't. Cranberries grow in swampy, marshy areas. And so this was a natural food source that Europeans were missing out on when they came to Wisconsin for the first time. And so when if you've driven across Wisconsin and seen the cranberry marshes, you see water, whether they're actually flooding in the beds, and there's multiple reasons for them flooding the beds, or just seeing reservoirs, lakes, streams next to cranberry beds. There's a reason for that, because they were naturally growing in swampy, marshy areas. So we're going to dive into climate, which is everyone's favorite topic, because we're seeing all kinds of crazy weather patterns. And Wisconsin is really great for growing cranberries because these really cold winters are ideal for protecting our vines in the wintertime. And so for diseases to grow, they need to survive all year long, or they need to be brought in the springtime after winter. So our cranberries are protected by a lot of diseases because of our really frigid winters. Right now, cranberries only need about 2 fungicide applications throughout the entire season. And out east, where they also grow cranberries, they need maybe 6 fungicide applications. And so there's a lot of chemicals going out, something that is, at this point, a necessary part of production. But we're able to keep those applications to a minimum because of our cold winters. And there's only 2 fungicides that are approved for cranberries. So if we did lose our cold winters that kill off the diseases every year, we might be in trouble, and we might need scientists to get stepping on new chemistries to keep diseases away from our cranberries. So another cool thing about our winters and protecting our vines, I love this. Allison told me this, and I just lost my mind. I thought it was so cool. So when you go out and if you're driving around in the wintertime and you know there's a cranberry marsh there, it looks flat. Normally there's beds kind of sunken into the ground, right? But what they did here is create a natural barrier from our frigid temperatures. What they did is flood the cranberry beds as high as they could. They'd let the top, I don't know, just a foot freeze. And then they would let the rest of the liquid water underneath that ice ledge flow out of the bed. So they would end up having this kind of hollow spot under the ice. So you'd have the cranberries, the vines right under there in the wintertime. They'd have an open space of air and then about a foot of ice sheet over the top of that. And they do this intentionally so that the vines would be insulated from the cold. When we get those really cold snaps in the wintertime, those could damage our vines and then impact the next season's fruit production. So this is a really cool, innovative way that our growers are using water even in the wintertime to make sure that they get a good crop next year. Okay, so where did the name cranberry come from? So Native people groups were not using that name. Is there any idea what these flowers look like? These are cranberry flowers. These are green, immature cranberries. Cranes. Cranberries. If you didn't know that, I just think some of these things are so interesting because grew up in Wisconsin, I never knew that. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It looks like a crane. And so I thought that was kind of fun to share. And so now that we know that cranberries were native to Wisconsin, they'd been growing here for thousands of years. Native groups were harvesting them and using them for all kinds of different purposes. So Europeans came and they didn't want to live in these swampy areas, but once they found out the cranberries were there, they wanted to get in on the cranberries as well. So they would actually bring up folks from Chicago, so more metropolitan, more habitated areas. They would bring them up from Chicago when they knew the cranberries were going to be ready in the wild. They'd pick them, they would sell them, and then they would go home. And they wouldn't actually stay here. Here being where cranberries grow. So I'll come back to this later, but when cranberries were growing in the wild like this, they would get 6 barrels of cranberries per acre. Now that measurement doesn't really mean much to us right now, but I'll come back to it. So they're growing 6 barrels of cranberries per acre. So at the times when they were harvesting cranberries and just kind of coming up from Chicago, from metropolitan areas, and harvesting the cranberries, a lot of times songs and poems and things were written. And so Allison showed me this poem, and a person wrote the poem, and then somebody else came along and put it to a song. And so I wondered if there was a recording of this song, and I found one. We're going to move on in history. So at this time, sorry? Oh, so the folks were, again, realizing that they could come up and harvest the cranberries and then go back home. Kind of a sweet gig. They weren't doing much work except for those few weeks during the fall, about this time. And so there was this Whittlesea Marsh is still in operation, and they just celebrated their 150th year of growing cranberries. So legend has it, Allison said I had to do this, okay? Legend has it that one season they brought folks up to harvest cranberries and realized that a forest fire had gone through. Everything was gone, it was destroyed, they had to send everybody back to Chicago, and it was just kind of a lost season. That's when they realized that it could be beneficial to actually stay on the marsh throughout the season and protect the vines and actually farm them. And so that's when people realized that it might be good not only to protect from forest fires, but to protect from the frost and other, maybe wildlife that may be coming in and taking a snack from their harvest. And so this is the first time that folks decided to stay on the marsh rather than going back to Chicago. Okay, so going back to those 6 barrels of cranberries per acre, this is the barrel. That's it. Very basic. Just 6 of those per acre. That's what they were growing. Okay, so I feel like I skipped a slide. Hang on. I jumped really far ahead here. I did. Here we go. Okay, I missed this one. Okay, so another piece of innovation. So they learned that they need to stay on the cranberry marsh to protect the vines through necessity. So another piece of necessity that was developed is cranberry pickers. So after folks had been on the cranberry marshes, actually cultivating them and being there year round, they were using hand, what do they call them? Hand harvesters. So they're just like these tines that they would, it'd take a lot of power and they would have to rake the cranberries up and it would just be a lot of work all day long. So Allison told me about this story. She said Thomas Darlington had a career in designing jet engines. But his family owned a cranberry marsh. But unfortunately, his brother Joseph was killed, ironically, in a plane crash. His brother designs jet engines, so that's unfortunate. But so although Tom was not a farmer, he was asked to take his brother's place running the family's cranberry marsh, which they had owned since 1857. So he moved from Pennsylvania with his wife and a 6-month-old to the bog for the 1950s harvesting season. So Tom soon saw that the need for a machine would make harvesting a lot easier than those labor-intensive hand harvesters. So he got to work, and within 2 years, Tom had designed a successful mechanical picker, which reduced the labor need by 90%. And if we know anything about businesses, even today, labor is a big deal, just getting people in to do the work, especially if it's really hard work. So this was a big deal for cranberry marshes that were trying to get people into harvest. So Tom went on to mechanize also a blueberry harvester as well. And the Darlington harvester is still used today. So today it was owned by Hayden Manufacturing Company, and they still sell these Darlington pickers. So out of necessity, this guy came to his marsh and was like, ooh, we're not doing this by hand anymore. This kind of sucks. So he created that. And so what it does now is kind of a rake that turns. You can kind of see a reel a little bit on the front, and it kind of knocks the cranberries off the vine, and that's what you see floating when you drive around today and see cranberries floating in the marsh. All right, here we go. Now we're back on track. Okay, so those 6 barrels of cranberries per acre are these barrels. So they'll pick 6 of those per acre. So if we move ahead in time, now we're picking not 6 barrels of cranberries per acre, but 268 barrels of cranberries per acre. And they still use this measurement today for harvesting. I think I read that a barrel is about 100 pounds. And that is the measurement that they're still using today to measure harvest of cranberries. All right, now we're gonna get into the agronomy part of it because that's where my background comes in. And I'm a little bit more confident on this sort of stuff, but the history is really cool too, right? So who in here, by a show of hands, gardens or farms or, I don't know, plays around with plants? Love it, you're my people. I love all the rest of you as well. So cranberries are a perennial crop. As we've learned, they go dormant in the wintertime, and then they'll start growing again in the spring throughout the harvest season, and then they'll go dormant again. So this is in contrast to an annual crop or an annual plant that needs to be planted or reseeded in the spring. It'll go through your growing season, and then it'll probably die in the wintertime, and you have to replant it. So perennial plants are going to come back in the spring. So for cranberries, last year's growth is really important for this year's harvest. So growers have a lot to keep in mind when they're growing cranberries. So in this diagram, we see previous season's growth with this blue circle, and then this season's growth. So last season's growth is where this season's cranberries are going to come, and the flowers. And then meanwhile, while this year's cranberries are being developed and then harvested, next season's growth is already happening. So as opposed to maybe corn growers or folks who are growing annual crops, perennial growers have a lot on the line. When they're managing this season's growth, they also have next season's cranberries to keep in mind. So another interesting thing that's in contrast to a lot of the crops we grow in Wisconsin, cranberries grow naturally in these swampy, marshy soils, which are naturally low in pH, so they're pretty acidic. So they grow in this 4.5 to 5.5 range, which may not mean a lot to most of us. But most crops in Wisconsin are growing in the 6 to 7 range. So you don't need to read all this or know anything about the nutrients or anything. But in this range, as you look up the line of nutrients, they're more available at this 6 to 7 pH range. At this lower range where cranberries grow, nutrients aren't as available. And because they evolved in this soil, they don't need that many nutrients compared to corn or soybeans or other crops that are grown in Wisconsin. And so this is another way that a lot of farmers in Wisconsin don't quite understand cranberries and how they grow. They're just a little bit too different. They're like, we'll leave it to the cranberry growers to know what's going on. So another interesting part of cranberries, so they're growing the new shoots for next season, right? And this is a type of plant where if that vine were to lay on the ground, new roots will come out all across the vine, a lot like tomatoes. A lot of times we plant tomatoes really deep because new roots will shoot out from wherever the vine is touching the soil. Okay, so cranberries do the same thing. So again, legend has it that we're going to go over to Massachusetts. So picture yourself in Massachusetts. Okay. Apparently a captain of a merchant ship off of Massachusetts saw cranberries growing in the area, maybe off the beach, and they saw the wind blowing the sand over the top of the cranberries, and then noticed that new growth was coming up. There were no new roots coming out. And so cranberry growers commercially today mimic that sort of action by nature, and they spread sand on top of their cranberry beds about every 3 to 5 years, I think. And it's very thin, a 1/4 inch layer of sand. But they'll spread that across the beds in wintertime. So this truck is driving on top of that ice sheet. I have another story about that too. So the truck is driving on top of the ice sheet, spreading a very thin layer of sand so that when that ice melts, the sand will settle on top of the vines. The vines will feel or sense the new soil there, and it'll shoot out some new roots and then some new growth. So the new roots allow it to take up more nutrients and kind of refresh its rooting system so that old roots might have a chance to die off and go away. You got new roots to take over. So another story I have about the ice sheet, I actually learned from Allison. She did a podcast with UW Extension, and she talked about how on these ice sheets I talked about before, where it's hollow underneath and this thick layer of ice over the beds in the wintertime, she learned how to drive a car on ice on that in the wintertime. So on her family's cranberry marsh, they're like, all right, kid, you know how to drive on a road, but can you figure out how to get your car back into control if you lose control on ice? All probably driven on ice in the wintertime. How do you not go off into the ditch? So she learned how to get her car back into control on the frozen cranberry beds. And I wish I had that experience growing up because that sounds so fun. I hope she invites me to do that sometime in the winter. So another aspect of cranberries that I thought was pretty cool is, and something we don't often think about, is pollination. So a lot of the foods we eat today require pollinators to pollinate the flowers and produce that fruit or that vegetable, well, yeah, so that we have a crop to harvest at the end of the year. Cranberries are no different. So a survey went out to cranberry growers last year, and they said that 60% of growers bring in honeybees and or bumblebees to pollinate their marshes while they're blooming. And another way that they bring in pollinators is by growing pollinator gardens. So this is something that we're hearing from all different groups, even in the La Crosse areas. If you have an open part of your lawn, maybe put some native pollinator plants in there, and then we can have some food for the bees. So this is something that cranberry growers are putting on their marsh as well. But they need a really specific seed mix to go there, because what we don't want in that seed mix is plants that can be weeds in our cranberry beds. So typically the weeds in cranberry beds are plants just like cranberries. They're woody and they're perennial. So none of those are usually in the seed mixes provided to cranberry marshes. But what they are plants that thrive in low pH, because that's where cranberries thrive. And they're plants that bloom all throughout the season, except when cranberries are blooming. So someone put in all this research and did a lot of on the ground, researching and testing out of flower pollinator seeds, and found the perfect mix to put on cranberry marshes so that they're blooming really early in the season and after cranberries bloom. So I thought that was really interesting, that they have their own very specific pollinator mix to put on their marshes so that they can go away more from buying bees and bringing them into their marshes, because that's an expense that growers don't normally want to do. Cranberry growers are really cooperative. A lot of times the culture is changing a little bit, but a lot of times farmers are a little bit competitive with each other and want to get the most yield. They want to make the most money, which is understandable. We all want to make a living, right? But a lot of times they're not sharing secrets with one another. And so they want to kind of have a leg up on their neighbor. Cranberry growers are kind of the opposite of that. They're like, if we're not in this together, we might not survive. We might not do well. And so this is a picture of the first ever cranberry growers summer meeting. They're still doing these meetings today. They've done them annually since. And I went to one last year. It was very cool. And so, commercial cranberry growers are still getting together and talking about what they've learned over the season, with those changing weather patterns, what should we do in this sort of situation? So they're really cooperative with one another. And that is also showing in a survey. I know you don't want to look at surveys, it's kind of boring, but a survey went out to cranberry growers because Extension's wanting to know, talk with the growers and understand where they're at. They asked, has anyone from your farm participated on any boards or committees in the cranberry industry? So almost 70% of cranberry marshes in Wisconsin have sent someone from their marsh to serve on a board or a committee. And so they're really invested in making sure that cranberries continue to be best in Wisconsin. And they know that we're kind of in it together in that way. All right. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stuff that I do and the reason that Allison asked me to do this presentation. So unlike a lot of other extension educators in Wisconsin, I get to work with all of the crops in Wisconsin. And that's pretty unique. A lot of other folks are really dedicated to a particular crop or a particular group of crops. And so I work on this program that gives grants to farmers who want to do research on their farms. And so I always think that farmers are the best scientists to work on their own farms and tell us the things that they're learning as well. So this grant program is available to any crop in Wisconsin, and we have a lot of corn projects, but we also have 4 cranberry projects with 4 different cranberry marshes in Wisconsin. So to kind of compare and contrast corn and cranberries, which I've done a little bit, so cranberries are best, as Allison would say, but corn plants we call our practical consumers. So when we talk about fertilizer or nitrogen in particular, corn will take up what it needs And if you put more out there, it'll say, I don't want it, I don't need it, and it won't take up any more nitrogen. And a lot of times what that means is that that nitrogen is leaching through our soils down into groundwater and polluting our waters, which is something that, in particular, if you have a private well that you're drinking from or cooking with, nitrates in our water, something we want to really be cognizant of. So if you're not testing your well, get in touch with someone from Extension or the county, and we can help you do that. I have a private well, and I live in town, and I have to have it tested every couple of years. It's been okay so far, but this is a big reason why we have high nitrates in our groundwater. In contrast, did someone have a question? Oh, okay, I missed her. So in contrast, cranberries are luxury consumers. And in this way, they kind of keep our water really clean, but they can reduce their own yield because when you give cranberries too little nitrogen, they miss out on yield. They're like, I need more energy. But if you give them too much nitrogen, they'll just keep taking it up. They're like, more, more, more. And they won't let it leach to groundwater, which is nice. They're not culprits for polluting our water. But when they take up too much nitrogen, instead of this vine, what we want and what we have the cranberries growing at the tip of it, that's what we want. That's a vine that didn't get too much nitrogen. This one did. So this one, it started growing. Do I have a pointer? Maybe? I have a pointer. I don't know if you can see that. So it started growing up, 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 up. And at this point, we would like it to stop growing because this will have next year's cranberries on it. But it got too much nitrogen. So it kept growing, kept growing, kept growing, kept growing, kept growing. And it won't really produce much fruit on that next year. And so it's just putting all of its energy into growing leaves and stems. And it's just not going to be much use to us next year. So while cranberries aren't culprits for polluting our waters, too much nitrogen will reduce their yield. So it's something that cranberry growers are really trying to hone in on. Time is it? Okay, so another survey. So cranberry growers were asked, when do you apply your first dose of N, P, and K? So these are the three biggest nutrients that plants need to grow, and it's hard to read right there. So when cranberry growers are applying their fertilizer, they call it spoon feeding. So a lot of times when other farmers in Wisconsin are spreading fertilizer across the field, they do it once, maybe twice. Cranberry growers are a lot of times spoon feeding teeny tiny doses of fertilizer to their cranberries 4 or 5 times throughout the season so that they can avoid that really long growth of vine and really focus nutrients in where they want it, where the cranberries are. So they asked the growers, when do you apply your first dose of nitrogen? And they had all these different options, and they're all across the board. No one really applies their first dose of nitrogen at the same time. They all kind of pick a different time. And maybe that's something that works for them. Maybe we don't really know the answer to when we should start fertilizing. So that's where this grant program came in. We had growers who were interested in learning about when to apply their nitrogen. They can do research right there on their farm. So I have 2 examples, one in Juneau County and one in Adams County, and they're smack dab right next to each other.
Water and the wells and stuff. Are they working on, well, I guess they're working on how to reduce it. That's why they do all these tests.
Yeah, so the question is, if we know that nitrogen is polluting the waters, are we working on trying to reduce it? And that's exactly what this program is doing. Yeah, so if there's other options. There are farmers that are looking at other options. So I'm gonna go off on a tangent to answer that real quick. There's a group of plants called legumes, and they produce their own nitrogen. And so we generally aren't applying more nitrogen to those fields like soybeans and alfalfa. And so there are products that companies are developing to make corn like a legume. So you would apply this product to your cornfield, and it has these bacteria in it that fix nitrogen like legumes do naturally. And the hope is that we can kind of trick non-legume plants into being legumes. So there are different things that are being developed to try to get around this issue of pollution, and producing nitrogen in the first place is a big pollutant as well. So the farmers that are involved in this, and Extension and UW in general, know that it's a problem, and this grant program is a big response to that problem. So trying to get farmers on board, because have you ever tried telling a farmer how to manage their fields? This is never going to work. They're not going to listen to you. They know their fields best. So they're testing out some of these different options to try to reduce our pollution in Wisconsin. Yeah. Probably. For cranberries in particular? Another great question. Could you write that? Do growers apply phosphates to promote flowering? Great question. My focus is on nitrogen. Does that mean I ignore the other parts of plant growth? Maybe a little bit. I'm going to get back to you. You have great questions. Do you have a background in farming? Thank you for doing that. Okay, should talk to you more. Okay, I'm going to get back to this, and then hopefully I'll have more time for some questions that I don't have answers to. I'll do my best, and I'll get back to you on questions I don't know. So these two projects in Juneau County and Adams County, they're right next to each other, but they have very different questions that they want to answer related to their nitrogen fertilizer. Come on. Ooh, okay. So in Juneau County, this grower says, our marsh knows how much nitrogen we want to apply, but when should we start applying it? So this is this question from the survey. When should I start spoon feeding my cranberries? So she's actually doing a project where she has 6 of her cranberry beds that she's giving fertilizer to at different time frames. And then and these are 2-year projects. So at the end of those 2 seasons, she's going to gather yield samples from those different areas and quality samples, because you don't only want a lot of cranberries, you want really good cranberries. You want quality cranberries. And then information on how those vines are looking. So at the end of these 2 years, we'll hopefully be able to help her understand better how to feed her cranberries. So this other marsh has a really interesting problem. They have high nitrates in their water already. And so we talked about how water is kind of the lifeblood of cranberry marshes. And they use that water in different ways, whether it's in the wintertime for protecting their vines, or in the harvest time for letting the cranberries float and harvest them a little bit easier. She knows that she has nitrate in her water that she's flooding her beds with. She's wondering if I am already putting nitrogen on my beds because I'm irrigating them or protecting them in the wintertime, do I even need more nitrogen fertilizer? She's wondering if she's putting too much on and buying nitrogen that she doesn't actually need to be spending money on. But also, when should I apply that nitrogen? So they have lots of different questions going into it. But the question that Adams County Farm is asking is not a question that the Juneau County Farm is asking. And so this program lets people come in with their own question and try to do research with our help to make sure that they're doing their research really well. So we don't have answers to these questions yet. These projects are still in progress. But maybe I'll come back in a couple of years and tell you what happened. So, fun facts, because we can't end something without fun facts, because there's a lot of fun facts in cranberries. I feel like I've told you a good handful of them already. But one that Allison had to point out to me that feels very obvious in hindsight, she wears this t-shirt, so she decided to take a picture of it for me as an example. So we see cranberries float, okay? In the fall, when cranberries are ready to harvest, they flood the beds. They use this picker machine to knock the cranberries off of the vine, and then the cranberries float. And then they're able to corral the cranberries in and suck them up with a big vacuum and take them off to be processed. Why do cranberries float? Is it because they have these air pockets inside? Is that the only reason they float? What if we cut a cranberry in half? Would it still float? Yes, it would. They don't float just because of those air pockets, which is something that I kind of always thought was the case. They're like an apple. They're not super dense. They have all the flesh. It has tiny little air pockets in it anyway. So even if you cut a cranberry in half, it would still float. So tell that at your next family Thanksgiving. And then, okay, so I went through and I found my favorite fun facts about cranberries. And I also wanted to show you this. This is Allison helping with harvest on her family's marsh. So they have these irrigation pipes, and that's what she's carrying. She said that if you have picked off your parents and they want to teach you a lesson, they say, go pick up pipe. So she got in trouble that day and had to go pick up pipe. And so I'm sure she'll be thrilled that I showed you that. So they have to pick up the pipe. These would more normally be irrigating and watering the beds during the summertime, but they have to move the pipe so that I don't think these are called pickers. I'm going to call it a picker, but the thing with the wheel that knocks the berries off the vine, if you didn't move the pipe out of the way, they would just hit those and cause damage to the equipment. So Allison got in trouble. Okay, so cranberry was officially named Wisconsin State Fruit in 2004. You'd think that it would have happened sooner, but apparently we needed to get some people on board for that. More than half of the entire world's supply of cranberries comes from Wisconsin. So a lot of times we're so proud of us being the dairy state, which we should be proud, but no one else in the world can say that they grow more cranberries than us. And I think that is something that we can be really proud of. And cranberries are really high in antioxidants and may help support memory function and coordination. So I have cups of cranberries back there. So at the end here, if you haven't gotten any yet, grab your cranberries and eat a handful a day if you want to see. And I say may support. So I don't think it's scientifically proven quite yet, but we can hope, and cranberries are good. These are sweetened cranberries, so they do have some added sugar to them because the tart raw cranberries are not always fun to eat. So there are about 250 cranberry growers in Wisconsin. Some are much bigger than others, but some of them have been in operation for 150 years or more. Contrary to popular belief, cranberries do not grow underwater. So when we see the fields flooded, there's a purpose for that. They're not always flooded. Either we're harvesting them or in the wintertime, we're trying to protect those vines from frost. There may be other reasons why they're flooded. Maybe it's insects have infested that bed and we're gonna drown those suckers so that we don't have to spray maybe. So there's a lot of different purposes for flooding a bed, but they don't grow that way. I think a lot of times we grow up thinking that. And a newly planted bed will take 3 to 5 years to start producing cranberries, but once it does start producing, it may be producing for decades. So if you ever have a chance to visit a cranberry marsh in Wisconsin or anywhere else, some of those beds are older than I am, and that is pretty amazing that they're still producing. And some of the cranberries that are being grown in those beds are native varieties. They're just plucked from a natural habitat and multiplied with sand or cuttings and produced into a bed. Not many of the beds are native varieties. Some of them have been cross-pollinated, but not very much. They are all very, very much related still. Well, all right, I'm almost there. Okay, this is going to be the place I direct you to if you want more fun facts. It's wiscran.org, and I love this website. I actually used it myself recently because I'm going to go on a cranberry marsh tour with my parents this weekend. And I found it from this website. So if you were to go here and you clicked on experience, there's recipes, some of which I have printed back there, and marsh tours and festivals. So Warren's Cranberry Fest was this last weekend. I've still not been there. I've lived here for 10 years. I don't know. I gotta go one of these years. I hope you all have been there. But I'm gonna go on a cranberry marsh tour this weekend, and and put on the waders, hope they don't have a hole in the bottom of them, and walk out into the marsh and take some pictures with my parents and have that fun experience with them. So if you're looking for something like that, October is the perfect time to look into those. And they have all kinds of different options. They have ones where you can just go there and listen to a talk. You can jump on a wagon and be carted around, or on a bus. There's walking tours. There's all kinds of different options that they have, and all over the state. Did you know that there's marshes up by Eagle River? There are. They're kind of all over the place. Once you start looking, you'll see them everywhere. Oh, cranberry marsh. So are they considered organic? There are organic certified cranberry growers in Wisconsin, but they're like any other crop where you need to get that certification to call yourself an organic grower. Some of them may be growing in a sustainable way similar to an organic grower, but like if you go to the supermarket, you might see ones that are marked organic or not. So they can be, but not all of them are. Yeah. Oh, I don't know much about the cost. I know that Allison mentioned to me that it depends on what market their berries are going towards, whether it's juice is likely ocean spray. If it's dried or if it's frozen, it could be ocean spray, but it might be someone else. So I don't know a ton about that topic though. Yeah, thank you. I saw your hand first. Yes, yeah. So when do they bloom? I think they're blooming generally in June. And they do sometimes offer tours in the spring when they're blooming. Sorry?
I thought it was all underwater.
No, yeah, right. And that's what I thought too. They're not always underwater. So in the springtime, if you're driving past a marsh, a lot of them are very much next to roadway, so you can see them. You'll see dugout beds, and then they call them dikes along the sides. And so those are very specific to cranberries. You won't see those beds like that with other crops. But around June, you'll see them blooming like that. And if I'm not sure how easy the blooms are to see from the road. If you were to come up to maybe a fence line or something, you could see them, but you'll see bees buzzing around too. And they really ignore you when you go into the beds. They are really interested in those flowers. But yeah. Oh, I can answer that. Woo! Boop, 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 boop. Almost there. Probably was an easier way to do this, but here we are. Okay, so the counties that produce the most cranberries are in pink, so Wood County. Wood County is the top producer, and then red is the next producer, so that's Monroe and Jackson. And then orange is the next one, and that's Juneau. You want me to keep going? Okay. Yeah, so there's cranberry. I went to one in Iron County up there. I had no idea cranberries were up there. Yep. What? Oh, you are gonna go on a tour? On a bus tour? Nice. In what? Really? Can you still sign up for that? Oh, all right. So apparently through Parks and Rec, you can. Yeah, it might be full, but apparently through Parks and Rec, they're going to go up to a marsh in northern Wisconsin. All right, you don't need to know. Apparently, you're going to be brought there. So, yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities even outside of the resources that I showed. Check out Parks and Rec. That's through La Crosse. Nice. I missed that. Yep. They transplant. So the question is, when they maybe start a new bed, do they throw seeds out there or do they transplant? So they take cuttings. So it's that unique ability for the cranberry vines to root wherever they happen to touch the soil. So what I've heard is when they need to grow a new bed, they'll call it renovating a bed. So they might see all these vines starting to kind of die, not producing as well. So they will dig up all of the vines that had been in there for decades. I don't know what they do with them. Maybe those are the ones, they actually cut up those vines into little kind of matchstick pieces, and then they just sprinkle them out there. And then they sprinkle sand over the top, and then they start rooting. New bed. Yeah, it's refreshed and it's kind of like brand new plants out there. Yeah. Ooh, can we do that in a small urban garden? It would be fun if it worked. I think you would need to do a little bit of work on our soil pH. They do tend to grow in sand. Well, some of them do. Some in different counties, they actually grow in muck. Very different than sand, kind of heavy and wet. And so I think there'd be some adjustments we would have to make to the soil, but we do have sandy soils around here along the river. My soil in my yard is very sandy. So I think it could be done. Yeah. Any other, got last minute or two? Yep.
The term high bush cranberries, what's the difference between tiny and where they grow or something?
High bush. Does anyone know about high bush cranberries? No? We'll Google it. Oh,
Somebody said,
someone say blueberries? Okay,
okay, maybe
yeah. I'll have to look into that. We'll Google it, was the suggestion. Yeah. There are different varieties. So the one cranberry marsh I mentioned in Juneau County, that they're involved in the NOPP program with me, they're looking at two different varieties. One of them is called Mullica Queen, and the other one is called Stevens. I know that those are two very popular varieties. I know that there are maybe half a dozen native varieties of cranberries. So the ones that were just found naturally, there's about six of those. Two of them were found in Wisconsin. And now, I don't know how many varieties there are now, but there really aren't that many compared to corn or soybeans, where there are hundreds of varieties of corn out there that different companies are selling. Cranberries are only in their second or third rotation of breeding. And so I'm gonna throw a couple dozen varieties of cranberries out there. So there are, if you're eating cranberries, I don't know which variety we're eating back here, but there are different ones. Yep.
Are there any sweet cranberries?
Are there any sweet cranberries? I don't know. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think they're mainly tart, what we know of as cranberries, and then they're sweetened. Yeah, go ahead.
What percentage of our cranberries from Wisconsin are made?
Ooh, I'm so excited. What percentage of cranberries in Wisconsin are made into juice? Another great question that I don't know the answer to. I'll find that out. I'm gonna give this list to Allison and be like, what did you even talk about? So I'll find that, and I'll work with the library and Heather to see if we can share that out somehow, or maybe come back to a next one of these and I'll let you know. Yeah.
It's a popular landscaping plant, but it's not really a cranberry. It's a honeysuckle.
Interesting. Okay, so the high bush cranberry is a landscaping plant that's actually a honeysuckle. So they're messing with us with the names. Good. Okay, last one, I think.
Cranberries, like ocean spray.
I'm not sure. I actually don't know, yeah, how those relationships work. So I'm not sure how many of them have.
Ocean spray warehouse. Babcock is bigger than the rest of the city.
Yeah, it's huge. Yes. And there's another facility in more central Wisconsin too. I'm not sure. I feel like Allison gave me this like 60 slides to try to make a presentation out of, and I bet the answer's in there somewhere. So I could probably find it. And that's all I have prepared. So thank you.